Welcome back to the channel. In today's video are butterfly effect stories by people who were affected from small decisions they have made. I had to call my heart surgeon to give him my new insurance numbers. I had only just gotten them because the person who had them had the flu and was not getting back to me as soon as I got my numbers. I called surgeon and the receptionist said, "Oh, hey, we just had a cancellation for this Friday, do you want it?" Of course I wanted to get it over and not wait another month. Decided to take the open heart surgery cancellation appointment a month before my actual appointment. The surgeon said that thank goodness I did because once he got a look inside, he realized I would not have survived to the original appointment date. So, if the insurance lady didn't have the flu, I would have gotten those numbers a lot sooner, and never gotten the offer to have the surgery when I did. Someone else's flu saved my life. Decided I would rather use my bathroom than a porta potty. Found my wife cheating, she attempted suicide, I moved multiple states away. In the 7 years since I have made nothing but positive changes and went from $18 per hour laborer to a well-respected person in my profession making 6 figures. I'd probably still be working that dead-end job. Aside from that, without recounting all the details, I went to see a doctor about a splinter from chopping firewood. 6 months later they removed most of my kidney with renal cell carcinoma. Without the splinter I'd likely be dead from kidney cancer. So a few years back, I lived in Nice, south of France, for a while. As a musician I would make a bit of extra cash busking, and one day, I figured I'd go and busk at the Promenade d'Anglais by the sea. It's usually packed, and it's just a generally pleasant place to be. I set up, played a couple of songs and was doing pretty well and making a decent amount of money. Then suddenly not one, but 2 of my guitar strings snapped. I even remember I was playing the scientist at the time. I was massively gutted and decided to cut my losses early. I stormed off home, by the station, in a bit of a sulk at having to restring my guitar and cutting short what was essentially one of my most productive days of busking since moving there. Literally 1 hour later, my phone starts to blow up with family and friends freaking out and asking if I was at the Promenade. It was Bastille Day, 2016. The truck drove into the same crowd I was playing to, killing 86 people, including my at-the-time GF's uncle. I had 2 other friends who were amongst the 458 injured. I moved home the next month because it was too much, and haven't been back since. It's hard to explain, sometimes I think I was super lucky, sometimes I just kind of cry and wonder why I was lucky and others weren't. It's surreal, and despite what people think, it's a truly horrible feeling. In high school I took an intermediate biology course. I had never done biology before but was good at science generally, so I thought the intermediate course would be a good fit. My science teacher of a couple years previous happened to walk into my class to talk to the biology teacher and she spotted me in the class. She asked me what grades I had got the previous year. I told her and she nodded and left. A minute later she came back in and asked me to gather my belongings and leave the class. I was pretty sure I was in trouble for something I couldn't recall. She led me to another classroom and sat me down on an empty chair. Then she just started teaching. Turns out that she was running the advanced class that year and just decided to steal me as a student. I went on to take biology at undergrad level, and then a master's. I ended up doing a PhD in immunology and now work as an advisor for pharma companies. It gets better though. I decided I wanted to do my master's in London, and met a girl on the way. We are now 10 years in, and own a house together. All that because that teacher happened to look in my direction. My wife got an email from her old colleagues the day we returned home from our honeymoon, asking if she wanted to star in a short film they were doing for fun. She said sure, and asked if I could come along, as she knew I had an interest in movies, but at the time I worked in life insurance and was miserable. It was more than an interest. I had always wanted to make films, but never made the right connections with people and didn't know where to start. I made friends with the producer of that short film my wife was in, and 11 years later filmmaking and video production is my career. I've shot feature films, short films, video for TV and web, and all over the world because of that one email to my wife. Oh, and that original short film never got finished. My husband found out after 18 years that his mom's side of the family was Spanish, not Mexican. He found this interesting and changed his country to Spain on my space, instead the US where he really was. Meanwhile in Australia, I was helping my friend find Spanish people to add as a friend as she was learning the language. I came across my now husband and decided to send him a friend request as well. We got along really well and met in person after 3 years. Have been together 11 years, married for 7. If he didn't change his country to Spain, and only for a day or so, we'd never know each other existed. My desire for pizza set off a chain reaction that destroyed my family. One day got home from school and really wanted pizza. Family was poor, so spontaneous food trips weren't always in the cards. Really worked my pouty face to my mom and begged to go to the local pizza place for dinner. She said all right. While chilling there I saw my uncle walked by, and I was like, the heck, uncle, is that you? Now you might say, well, he wanted pizza, what's the big deal? Well, he lived several states away, so to arbitrarily be in town and not tell anyone was strange. Turned out he was having an affair with his sister-in-law, my aunt on the other side of the family. She was basically a gold digger, and the family protested. One thing led to another and everyone hates each other now, and we haven't had contact in like 20 years. I just wanted some pizza. KFC chipas with extra salt saved my life. The other day I was driving home from work, traffic was light and I was behind a car with a number plate that started KFD. Decided to duck through KFC drive-thru for chipas with extra salt as a little treat to myself. They took forever to bring them out, and by the time they finally did, all told about 10 minutes later, traffic has slowed to a complete halt. I need to get over a bridge that's normally 6 lanes which has now been reduced to 1. Turns out it's due to a massive collision involving several cars. When I finally get to the point where I'm driving past, I notice the number plate on one of the cars, that same KFD number plate. If I hadn't stopped to get hot chips, I'm fairly sure I'd have been in a major collision. One day when I was about 11 years old, I went to a farmer's market with my father. While we were there, I saw a street performer who was juggling, and I absolutely loved watching him. So I decided I was going to learn to juggle. A few months later, I started 6th grade, and my middle school had a juggling club after classes 1 day a week, where the very same guy I saw performing at the farmer's market would be teaching kids to juggle. So of course I went. 2 years later, I'm now 13 years old. I was looking online for some juggling forums, and Reddit was the most active one I could find. So I created a Reddit account. Eventually I started exploring other subreddits, and then one day I found myself in Reddit, where I read a post by a guy who had loaded a bunch of camping gear onto his bicycle and spent a year and a half riding from northern Alaska to the southern tip of South America. I love cycling, I love camping, and at the time, I'd recently returned home from my first international travel to Costa Rica, a country he went through on his journey, and absolutely loved that. So the way most 13-year-olds obsess over something, I developed a bit of an obsession for bicycle touring. Finally, the summer when I was 16 years old, I felt ready to pitch the idea to my parents, though on a much smaller scale. So one day, I borrowed my mom's bike, because the bike I had at the time had no way to carry my stuff, and I took whatever camping gear I could find in our garage and haphazardly bungeed it to the back of the bike. And then I rode to a state park about 40 miles from our house that we'd driven to many times before. I camped there for the night, then biked back home the next day. I absolutely loved it. So the next summer, it wasn't quite such a surprise to my parents when I pitched the idea of spending 4 days biking 200 miles, again camping in state parks each night. After that, I was going into my senior year of high school. I realized that perhaps my best opportunity to do some big crazy year-long bike camping adventure would be before I got stuck with a bunch of college debt, and then a career I couldn't easily leave, etc. So I decided to take a gap year after high school. After finishing high school in 2017, I realized that long-term traveling would require more money than I had. So after spending one last summer screwing around with my friends from high school before they scattered across the country for college, I took what little money I did have and went off on my most ambitious bike trip up to that point. Spending 20 days cycling 1,300 miles around Lake Michigan, starting and ending at my home in southern Wisconsin. When I returned from the Lake Michigan trip, I had $2 and change to my name, so I quickly found a job, selling my soul to the world of retail for the better part of the next 2 years. The first 2 weeks of October of 2018, I took my vacation time from work and flew my bike out to Asheville, North Carolina to spend those 2 weeks cycling up the Blue Ridge Parkway and part of Skyline Drive before turning east to Washington, D.C. And then, last summer, I decided it was finally time. I quit my job in early July, and then spent the next month and a half preparing for that big crazy bike ride I'd dreamed of for so long. In mid-August, I was finally ready, and I left my home in Wisconsin with the vague goal of riding to Seattle and down the Pacific coast. I spent the better part of the next 7 months cycling 5,300 miles around the country, turning east from San Diego into Arizona. In mid-March of this year, I was hanging out in Sedona, Arizona, waiting for the nighttime temperatures at the Grand Canyon to warm up a bit. When the coronavirus really started to take a turn for the worst. I was worried that airports and train stations might start shutting down, and not wanting to be halfway across the country from my family if and when that happened. I decided to bike the final 30 miles from Sedona up to Flagstaff and get on an Amtrak back home to the Midwest. Since then, I've been back to work, saving up some money for my next adventure. Now that I've seen most of the US, I'm starting to think of doing some international bike touring, and I'm pretty excited about the possibility of New Zealand, once they reopen their borders. Eventually I intend to go back to college, but for the time being, I'm not in any rush to do that. But when it does happen, I'll surely be studying for a field that will allow me to continue to travel extensively. I sent a message to a girl in high school just asking if she was alright, which led to dating her for almost 3 years. During which time she convinced me to try the drama club she went to, which convinced me to take drama class the following year, which made me take it the next year, where I met my next girlfriend, who introduced me to the friends I have today, and if I hadn't met them, I wouldn't still feel sick from drinking on Saturday night. Moral of the story, never message a girl. You'll wake up 4 years later with a hangover. Subscribe.